liked it.
Yeah, it was like a vibe from the 1960s. I was expecting to come in out, roaring in with my Roadrunner car and stepping out with a leisure suit on.
I was thinking like New Orleans. That's what it sounded like to me.
Oh, well, thanks for Scientist Mel for hosting today. And we'll see how long we'll be running on this little operation here. And we had music. Yay.
Yay. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to do this. I got my
Absolutely
Wednesday nights
delighted.
free.
Yes. Well, the more the merrier. That the old we have scientists, you're in the feed. We got TD Lane, Travis Adams. Hello, Travis. For those who are new to the thing, I will give a brief recap of what the hell I've been doing for the last months or so, right back into the last year. A person who does not like creationism was annoyed at the book Contested Bones by Christopher Rupe and John Sanford, and they did not feel like they wanted to go after this thing at a technical level of discussion, and said, "Would I like to do it?" And I said, "Sure." So they sent me the book, and that's what I've been doing. And this, in effect, is illustrating the whole principle of what source methods means. In source methods, probably the most interesting parts of the book are the boring parts for other people, which is what their references are, what sources do they bring up. That's where you'd look for the index. You'd see what footnotes they offer for particular technical points. This one naturally was more interesting because there's no index and no reference bibliography. So I had to go source by source, compiling a reference bibliography, which I keep track of. And I built up a spreadsheet where I'm looking at what sources are cited. Are they technical papers or secondary sources? A few of them are creationist sources that he kind of slips in finally. There's some Sanford and Sarfati and a few things like that over the bits, but not a huge number of them. Most of it's regular technical literature. Big swath, about half of the material is just secondary accounts. And of the technical literature, a lot of it's older. A big chunk of the material, about half, is used for authority quotes. And then the meat of the thing is, if they're citing a technical paper, are they fairly representing its content? Are they leaving out stuff that they should be discussing if they were going to be fair? And it turns out about half of the technical papers they cite, they're leaving out stuff that they should be mentioning. So that's a absurdly high rate. It's not a ridiculously well-documented book. Its total pages are 334, and they've only got about 1.7 sources per page. By contrast, our wee little book that we've just finished up volume 1 on has probably upwards of 3,000 sources.
I hope not per page. So
yeah. And so not per page. No, that's I'd have to do well, yeah, actually 3,000 sources over 500 some odd pages. So we're running about 6 or 7 sources per page. So we're talking about 2 to 3 times the level of documentation that you're finding in this sort of thing. And unlike Rupe and Sanford, we are not misrepresenting our sources. That's kind of the thing with it. So we'll be discussing a little bit about the just about done volume 1 of The Rocks Were There, which I've been up getting all the coordinated material on. It's about a 500-page book, so it's bigger than Evolution Slam Dunk and more technical material. And there will be volume 2, which we will be tackling afterwards. But volume 1 is a meaty little mother, and covers genetics and biology and paleontology and geology, and more head-up-the-ass creationists screwing up at the primary source level than has ever been documented before. And it's been a joy to write. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just delightful.
This is like an ancestor's tales size book.
Yeah. And both of us have learned an enormous amount, and we fed off of each other in terms of discovery and investigation of things. And I was delighted that our geologist, Steve Bauman, who went through our final geology chapter, functionally, there were no errors. It was just an occasional thing where he would point out terminology and a few little side issues that would be nice to add in, which in fact spurred me to add on some last minute stuff about this Kingston Peak that supposedly, according to, I think Snelling argued that it was the start of the flood. And that's Precambrian, by the way. It's during the cryogenic period. Whee! Anyway, hello, Benjamin Simpson and TD Lane, all in there in the live chat. I've got that opened up. So if you have any comments, yeah, TD Lane says Evolution Slam Dunk has practically 100 pages of references. It's not practically, it is exactly 100 pages of references. And the new book is even longer. There's so much more material, for one thing. Even if I were to do an illustrated edition of Slam Dunk today, there's a lot more around in 2020 than there was in 2016. But we're also very up to date. Big chunks of the work are citing sources from 2018, 2019, and even one or two little 2020s under the wire. So no one's going to be accusing us of not being up to date with the more recent creationist literature. Anyway, in fact, the stuff that we're looking at today with Sanford's book will be discussed at greater length in volume 2, because good old Rupe and Sanford stumble into the GULO gene, which is related. No, one of our patrons, thank you. One of Jackson, would you like a brief summary of the cute little GULO gene and why it's important for understanding phylogeny and natural evolution? You talk for a bit.
Well, now that you mention it,
yeah.
I think one of the original major papers on it was by a Chatterjee in the early 70s, where he was first documenting that all the simian primates, the anthropoids, the tarsiers, old New World monkeys, and the great apes all share the same mutations in this gene GULO, which
it's a real long name. That's why it's easier to say the acronym.
L-gulonolactone oxidase, which is involved in breaking down vitamin C, and so involved in synthesizing vitamin C for our bodies, but it's broken, so we don't do that, which is why we get our vitamin C through our diet, things like fruits, and because primates live in tropical environments, fruits that contain vitamin C are readily available. So even though it broke, you consider it a deleterious mutation, it didn't really affect them that much because these things were still available to them. But interestingly enough, this gene has also broken in a couple other different mammals and probably a few other groups, like bats
birds
and
too.
guinea pigs. Yeah, and birds, but also they eat fruits. So these other groups like bats and guinea pigs who also eat fruits, but it broke in different ways. So what's interesting about GULO is that it's broken in particular ways in these different groups,
based on the phylogeny.
Exactly, which is exactly based on phylogeny.
Yeah, why would a designer put a broken gene in various organisms or shut them down completely? And why doesn't he want us to have vitamin C unless we eat oranges?
Exactly, yeah. And it's even more interesting that not only is it broken, it's broken very particularly. It has the signature of common descent in the particular way that it's broken, which again, why would you do that?
Yeah, well, the creationists have a simple explanation. It's all designed. And
Right.
So what they do, Jeffrey Tompkins is one of the heavy guns in this. I put a link up to Tompkins's paper in the video description if you have the time on your hands to go plowing down through the little cutie. And also some link to Moran, who wrote a critique of some aspects of it. And it's interesting that Tompkins can't say he doesn't know what the data are, because once again, he cited technical literature that present all the information, but he's cherry picky about what he puts out of it. And Rupe and Sanford, for a while, I thought Rupe and Sanford had just copied somebody's secondary argument. But there's particular quotes and phrases in their book that suggest that no, they're jumping off the gangplank directly. They're drawing on the material secondarily for the technical papers. Every single one of the 3 or 4 papers that Rupe and Sanford cite on this are all ones that have been brought up by Tompkins and the anti-evolutionists, without exception. And no papers that relate to outside that little apologetic box managed to get cited. So, duh. So they're springboarding off of that. misrepresenting the material along the way. So we're going to probably have a really delightfully interesting GULO section in the second book, because this relates directly to human evolution in relation to primates, and then all of the scientific information about why genes break up and what the selection pressures are on them, and all that, which is getting sidestepped. And we'll do invariably what the creationists don't. Tompkins thinks all this is happening over a few thousand years. So the ones in the intelligent design camp who may be flirting with it are kind of at arm's length, although our little pal, Salvador Cordova, managed to riff off of the Tompkins paper. I put a linkage up to that as well. There's an awful lot of secondary parasitism in here. And I'd love to know what would not count as design in the creationist perspective, but yet they don't come down flatly and describe what their model is. The idea that all the little critters that are coming off of the ark, including humanoids, and are they like hominids, and who else, what does Adam and Eve look like? Those are all the little fiddly bits that we allude to in the new book about how unclear they are about a lot of these things. All of that genetics things that we can see in the existing organisms would have to happen very recently. And so theoretically, it's not that you can't suppose that a bunch of genetic mutations can happen super fast. It just is that none of the physical evidence supports that happening that fast. And Tompkins and all the rest never get around to offering an argument for why that super fiskiness is showing up and doing so monotonously with lineages. It's just a colossal mess. Let's see. Yeah. TD Lane, did any of us watch the conspiracy cats debate, Dr. Dino? I think, yeah. The latest Dr. Dino one that I just saw yesterday, I think, that was a curious little discussion. It was, as usual, the debater actually had a pretty good head on their shoulders on a lot of the material, and they knew a lot of Kent Hovind's material in advance, so they made a pay on that. The one area where, again, they're not filling in that hole is that source methods basement, to where in the conversation phase in there, you want to probe Kent as to where he's getting his source base from, and does he fact check it? No, he doesn't do that. And so the more you avoid that side issue of the underlying superstructure, you're missing that multiple layer of things. So he had a lot of the data floor fairly effectively, and potentially a good source methods issue, because he'd seen enough Kent Hovind videos. But you need to go that extra step in undermining their reliability, because that's what makes Kent and all the other people who have the same sort of problem, is they are parasites relying on somebody else to tell them what they think is true, and they never bother to fact check it. And since they have no capacity to do that, it just devolves into the usual rote mantra brigade, of which he was aware of the mantras that were popping out. You know, the dogs and cats example, and the nothing has babies, and stratification, you can turn into things into layers. And he rightly pointed out, you know, did any of that turn into rock? Nope.
Nope, none of that. None of that sand in the bottle turned into rock in 5 minutes. So
yeah, and that's that lithification issue. If you need a buzzword to look around in dealing with creationist problems, if anybody tries to claim that the flood could form the geological column, look to see where they're not discussing how the slurry turns into rock. They just kind of skip that part. You'll get a lot of Bertholdt, you'll get layers and stratification things, but how does it become rock? And that's the cake problem. So, you know, you can take the recipe for the cake and you can shake up the box and see the layers of the ingredients, but you can sit and stare at it all day, or you won't turn it into a cake. And even if you put the fluids in and try to zap it at 5,000 degrees to have it happen in a couple seconds, you ain't gonna get a cake that way either. That some things take time, and there are some crystals that take time to grow. My favorite examples are ones that are fast growing crystals that only take like 100,000 years at depth to form, but that's way longer than the entire universe in there. And so all of those little forensic clues, any creationist, like any good ideologue, will have examples of things that look good if you just look at it that way, that will fit their model. But the moment you pull back and look at the full data field, you discover it doesn't fit because there's too many things going on all at the same time. We have fun in the rocks book in explaining example after example. Some of the most amusing moments are when Jackson rattles off a massive taxa, all different fish forms. How come not one of these manages to make it into the same rock layer as the trilobites or the plesiosaurs? And you just got these guppies and gars, and it's just hilarious.
It was bugging me because I had actually read a paper not too long ago on Cambrian reefs. And so I was and I've been reading a lot of Cambrian literature recently, so I've been fairly well apprised of what organisms are living when. And so for wise to suggest that these organisms are living at the same, that the Ediacaran fauna and the Cambrian fauna and the modern organisms are living at the same time, but in different
ecological
zones.
Zonation. Yeah, that's one of their little buzzwords.
It's in the freaking water. How on earth is not a single bony fish washing into the Ediacaran zone?
None of them fish have this depressing tendency to swim. And so that only highlights the ridiculousness of the non-model that they have, because they can't really work out, like, what was the temperature of the water off of the place that eventually becomes the Burgess Shale? And when exactly was that? Before or after October 21st, 2350 BC?
Right. It's interesting because things can sink into different zones. Like when whales die, for instance, they sink down, and so they hit the bottom, like the abyssal plane, and organisms.
Yeah, and we can see that happening.
Why did that not happen to anything?
The same problem applies in the other direction of flying animals. Why do we never see like an eagle in the same spot as a pterosaur? What, they can't manage that? Some poor hapless little eagle about ready to breathe its last as the floodwaters rise, and there's already a little pterosaur there, and it avoids that because, oh nay, I must not land on that branch. I always have to seek to make sure that I'm with the angiosperms and the mammals over in that spot. No, that in every single issue, and the reason why this really becomes glaring is the moment you look at the primary source technical literature. And you start, we have a whole big section, probably the most extensive one that I can think of offhand in any of the anti-creation literature, where we go through and really make a big deal out of interbedded volcanic ash. We just have so much fun with that because you're stumbling off of it constantly. And even down to the little things where you read the technical paper that the creationists cite, to where the paper talks about that. I think there's one Plattenkalk. It's another one of those stupid little German words that refers to particular deposits that physically cannot form except in extremely still, calm, boring water. Not a ripple, not a wave. It's really dull. And this is supposedly forming during the gigantic cataclysmic thing that's moving continents across and burying dinosaurs. Something's wrong with this picture.
Yeah, more like everything.
Yeah. So it's a really a delightful little bit on this. I'm in the process now of finishing up the reference bibliography, all 150 some odd pages of it. And then once all the master text is in, then I'll go in and enumerate all the material for the indexing. And then Jackson has to go through the worst ordeal ever. He has to get me a picture of himself to put on the back cover of the book.
Yeah, that is quite possibly the most difficult aspect of this entire book. unfortunately.
T.D. Lanebrock. Yeah, I found this gobsmacking too. The most egregious thing Kent said in the debate with Dan is that whales are fish.
Wait a minute. Wait, hold on.
That it's just an arbitrary thing that Linnaeus made up to just classify whales as mammals.
You can't be serious.
Oh yeah, I'm serious.
He's
yeah,
not
he said
that stupid. He's not that stupid.
Oh, but he is. and that's so they're just like swimmy things. But you know, everything about the whale is a mammal, other than the fact that it's in the water. That's the only thing that would connect it up to a fish. Everything about it, from the way it moves to its mammary glands and the pseudogenes in it at the genetic level, the developmental biology level, the jaw system, all of the things. No.
I'm sorry. I can't. I have to see a video of him saying that. I can't. Just
yeah, it happened.
I mean, that's a new level of low. That's like,
there is no bottom to Kent Hovind.
I mean, that's not, low hanging fruit. It's not fruit that's fallen on the ground. That has fruit that has decayed, is now part of the soil.
It's excavating down into the swamp to find the moldy remains of what used to be fruit, and then pulling it up, and this dripping mess is what you're saying.
God.
No, it's amazing. Kent does no damn thing about anything. He has no map of time. He has no conception of systematics. It's dogs and cats, and then human beings, and birds are birds, and that's kind of about it. And
I'm actually depressed now, RJ. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, it's but it's understandable that, given the bad source base that he's been drawing off of, his idea of research is hunting around for ammo. And so I know he does this kind of thing. He looks up terms and he sees something that he can find, and there's a chart. He's happy to have charts, pages from textbooks. He's just obsessed about textbooks. How dare these textbooks have a chart? Well, charts reflect data, and the data is what is important. And the data don't go away based upon what you think the chart is. And if you have a bone to pick with the chart, fine and dandy. Come up with your creationist chart. Go ahead.
Is it just me?
Yeah.
Okay, there it goes.
And Scientist Mel says, Kent takes my phone calls and texts me. Oh, lucky Scientist Mel. Sean says, does Kent just know how stupid his following is and play to it? Or is he genuinely that stupid? Oh, both. He, in the sense that he is a Tortugan, and so too is his audience. That he plays to Scientist Mel's heater.
My heater. Yeah, I was just gonna chime in. Yeah, he will text me back because I've
Wow,
called him on my cell phone
loud.
before. I'm sorry. Here, let me turn that off.
It's all right.
No, it's okay.
So yeah. So
no, we like listening to you. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
No,
okay.
He texted me back because he couldn't take my call when I was on a live stream on one of my Oral Audacity episodes. So he texted me back, can I call it?
Nice.
Can you call back in a little bit? I said, okay, what time?
Yeah, you see, the approach that some critics of Kent have is that he is a craven liar, that he's only pandering to people for money. Oh, it's much worse than that. He's not really making a gigantic amount of money. He is a huckster and went to prison for some shady things, but it's because he believes in a weird view of taxation that comes from the right-wing ideology that he has. In many ways, he's just a normal somebody who believes the things he believes are true. The question is, does he have a sound method to do it? And the answer is no. So he relies very slavishly on an extremely narrow data field, most of which he's culled from the 1970s and 80s creationism. He still waves, literally on air, will wave Walt Brown's creationism book that he pointedly says he relies on as a source base. The problem is Walt's 100% wrong. So he's right off the bat in trouble on that. Then his source base, his people who follow him, we've both encountered Hovindistas in various contexts. We've never detected the slightest tendency on their part to fact check a damn thing. They accept everything Kent says is absolutely gospel. And so you have this daisy chain of escalating dumb that filters downstream. And because he can flick aside all the data field with presuppositionalism. Fossils don't mean a damn thing. You can't prove anything with anything. Besides, he's got the absolute word. He's willing to communicate to people, and I'm sure with you, Mel, he's itching to convert you to Jesus. And at some point, he's want to get you into that field. That's the reason why he would be having communications with you.
I don't even think he knows, because every time I've called him, I've told him that I'm, because I used to teach high school. And so I would say, I'm developing a unit on dinosaurs. And I'd really like your opinion. And I would ask him a question, and it would just go down a rabbit hole of crazy. It was really just
Yeah.
for my own
Well, he
morbid
doesn't know much,
fascination.
although he styles himself Dr. Dino. This is not somebody who is well versed in dinosaur paleontology.
Or how theses are written for your doctorate.
Yeah. Well.
Hello,
he
my
might
name
do
is
a
Kent
little better
Hovind.
today with spell checker turned on.
Oh my God.
But
Well, I mean, he starts it with, hello, my name is Kent Hovind. I taught high school science for 15. It's like, dear Christ, I think if any professor looked at the first line of his paper, they would die immediately.
Yeah, it's interesting that one thing that's been very, and that's a thing that I would have faulted and did in the debate that Kent had with Dan, is that he should have pressed him when he was preening about how he taught school. Where did he teach? I have yet to see a damn CV for this guy.
It was Aaron Raw talked about it. It was like he was like in a church, basically. He taught high school age, or taught. He basically had time with high school age kids and just kind of read them his crap.
Yeah, and it's a similar thing with other ones who have had a air quotes teaching career. Gary Parker, he taught in a conservative Christian school. There's an awful lot of them that have that range. It's much harder to find. You can find more examples over the intelligent design side of people who actually have been teaching in various contexts, and a few young earth creationists as well.
Sure.
LeVake and DeHart, and there are a few of those that pop up in that realm, and they usually get into trouble when they start trying to trot out the creationism in the schools, and then one of them moved to Korea of all places. I think DeHart,
North or south?
South. Oh no, I don't think he's going to pop up in North Korea. No, I think that would be outside of the thing. And you get a weird circumstances. As just an aside, there's a huge range in a lot of different religious contexts. It's always disconcerting to realize that Saudi Arabia still teaches geocentrism in their science school texts.
Wow.
I know, when the science comes up much at all. Meanwhile, Iran, of all places, still has full-blown evolution taught in its schools. They never changed any of the curriculum from the old Shah's day. So it's a weird mix moving just in the Islamic world. And you find, I can't think offhand of any modern culture that has as retrograde, although you're starting to get a little in the Christian world. You're finding some revisionism that's popping up, not necessarily on evolution, but I think the Poles, for example, the current conservative government of Poland is complaining about things in the history text that suggest that some Poles collaborated with the Nazis. They want to just whitewash that. The Turks, to this day, always go ballistic whenever you bring up the Armenians.
They're like 70 years late.
It wasn't even the current regime. It was the old bloody caliphs in Istanbul, the old Turkish Empire that did the genocide. But still, they just get ballistic about it.
Oh,
the
yeah.
Japanese are still very touchy about what they did in Nanjing in China during the 1930s, and so it cuts across a lot of different boundaries. But the evasion mechanisms are pretty much the same cognitively.
I mean, to be fair, in our own history, it's almost surprising how few people know about the internment of the Japanese during World War II.
Yeah.
Very few people.
There's an amazing lack of history in a lot of areas. And as history is actually what I have my little degree in, I tend to try to bring out that element, and did so in the book as well, you're always at a disadvantage if you don't know the background of the turf on which you're fighting. And so many people will get their creationism issues from websites that may or may not have a lot of the background of stuff. And some of the stuff they couldn't have a background on because it involves stuff in print. that unless you interact with somebody that knew the print background of it. So there's a lot that we're raking over the coals with Duane Gish and some of these older things that are in the pre-internet era that you need to kind of know the context of. And also on just the science issue, we delve into a lot of that with the embryology and developmental issues and vestigial organs, that so much of that involves stuff that has a background history as to how it worked out. And we want to either discuss it at some length or bring in references so people can follow up on their own. Mel says you had to teach veteran science teachers how to teach genetics and discuss what certain science vocabulary meant. That's something. Well,
that sounds scary.
What was the one I think Potholer just did a video on the stupidity of some Australian anti-environmentalists who were doubting that climate change was real and/or that it was affecting their current fire seasons down there in such intense ways. And the one politician was talking about a term, and he was putting the emphasis on the wrong syllables. I'm trying to think of the word that it was about, where he didn't realize what the thing referred to, and so he was pronouncing it incorrectly. And Potholer is getting rather peeved at him over it. Sometimes you might not know how something is pronounced until you hear somebody pronounce it, and so that can happen.
Oh yeah, I have that from with freaking fossils all the time when they're you just see it in a technical paper and you've never heard anyone pronounce it. Like for instance, was it Xiaohingkella? I think it was a preapulid worm from Cambrian of China. How many people are going around?
Well, when they're mixing Asian word roots with the Greek and Latin, then that only compounds the thing. And then, of course, you'll have some where will name the species name for a particular person, and that'll fit on the thing. But I just discovered in the debate Aaron Ra had with McElroy that his name is pronounced McElroy. I'd always been looking at it and seeing McLeroy, and
it's
McElroy. Yeah, I hadn't realized how it's pronounced.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah, there was another. McElroy is the fellow who was, I don't know that he's on it anymore, but he was serving on the Texas School Board Commission, textbook commissions, and it was a baneful influence. He's an idiot young earth creationist and a superficial secondary source citer. I think we allude to him very briefly in the new book because we like to cover just about everything. But so if you think that creationism is an abstract silliness that only silly people do and it doesn't have an effect on anything, terribly sorry. But there are creationists who are making decisions for school boards and making decisions in the House and Senate and in governorships, and others who are applying the same method that they use to think the earth is 6,000 years old to civic policy. And I say, what could go wrong there? Like everything.
True.
Sean says we have some idiot politicians in Australia. I didn't vote for it. Well, idiocy is unfortunately or fortunately not a national phenomenon. It's a cognitive thing that comes from just human beings being human beings. So you've always got a range of head up your ass folk. The question is, can they get into power? And when we get too many of the Tortukans in positions of authority, that's when things start running off the rails. And I would contend that it ranges from what happened in Nazi Germany and what happens in North Korea today, and on a less hysterical but still serious level, what's happening with Donald Trump and the administration in the United States. This guy is a classic Tortukan. He's surrounded by a pileup of Tortukans. And if you think creationism doesn't bump into that, remember that Jay Sekulow, Pat Robertson's legal arm, a creationist, is Donald Trump's lawyer. And Mark Meadows, I know for a fact, is big defender of Donald Trump. I see him being retweeted by the president and that. He's a young earth creationist and buddy with Ken Ham. Sold him some real estate down there.
Mike Pence, VP.
Yeah. And he's a bundle of prejudices. So bad method really comes into play on this. You can't differentiate it. And there are people, Jerry Coyne, if you follow him, he'll be railing on about the regressive left that you can find the same. There's not a dime's worth of difference between some extreme ideological leftist Tortukans and extreme ideological right-wing Tortukans. And what you get into trouble is when you have those two becoming the dominant forms, and you're trying to have to choose between Tweedle Stupid 1 and Tweedle Stupid 2. No, we have to move a different direction. So one of the big methods issues that I've been banging on is that this needs to be a broader thing, that reporters should be asking methods questions of people, that in election campaigns, when people are running for office at any level, if you can't ask some basic methods questions about basic things like how old the earth is, shouldn't that be known? There are far too many people that get into public office without ever having to express a view on some of those things. So you never get a chance to measure them. And then they're now in charge and they're applying the method that you didn't know they had to other issues because you liked what they had to say about whether or not there should be school buses or something else. And there's the problem, is that Tortukans can run off the rails at a moment's notice, and they can have it like a wacky spring. That's what happened at Dover. The Kitzmiller case is that none of the people who were on that school board trying to push pandas and people into the textbooks, schools and libraries ran on a "we hate evolution, we believe in creationism" platform. That only came up as a course of the fact that it hit a big trial, and the poor district spent millions of dollars trying to defend this idiot thing. And even conservative lawyers were saying, "You're going to lose." And it was just a debacle. Well, shouldn't you try to weed that out before you get to the speed bump stage?
You know, and the the intelligent designers have been crying about it ever since. Sweet, sweet tears that I love to drink.
Oh, History Miner says, doesn't Betsy DeVos's husband own or is CEO of Amway? It's something like that. They're a big mega bunch. I don't know if it's Amway or whether it's one of the big funders of the Discovery Institute is the Amundsen family. That's big in the insurance industry, and that if you look at, we put some notes in the New Rocks book, alluding to some of these little culture camp cross connections. You find there are linkages with the homeschooling movement. There's linkages with David Barton, the court historian of the culture camp creationists, that links up with a bunch of cross networks. Glenn Beck, and you bump into Dinesh D'Souza and quite a few others in there. So there's this metastasizing network that this bad method filters out into. And you ignore it at your peril, because you get such people in power and they're going to make decisions for you and your family and your kids. And otherwise, you're going to have a whole generation of absolutely inflamed Gretas coming in from every place on the earth, complaining about the fact that our generation or my generation, or whichever ones are in charge who are Tortukans, have screwed things up to the point where our survival is at stake. TD Lang says, don't say his name, uses one of the many nicknames such as Dotard Trump, Turnip, Marmalade Mussolini, Hair Orange, Cadet Bone Spurs, the Golden Toilet. That's all I got. Yeah, see, the Voldemort. Well, I did a video way early on in this brigade where I compared the person who shall not be named with Kent Hovind. That Kent Hovind is the Donald Trump of creationism, or Donald Trump is the Kent Hovind of American politics. Either way, it's somebody whose method is so bad, their arrogance and ignorance so monumental, that anybody that takes them seriously can't be taken seriously. So if there's going to be one kind of positive aspect, assuming that Trump is not voted in again, I'm not likely to see him turned out in the Senate trial, but let's vote him out of office in November, that Trump will have done the useful thing of flushing out masses of people who thought Donald Trump was a good idea and put on a MAGA hat to prove it. And so you're going to be able to know exactly who has got a big flashing Tortugan alert sign going off next to them, that they by nature have an inability to process information that doesn't fit an ideology. And that's, you can see the result of it. the clumsy, bullheaded policies that we have going on. Anyway, enough of Trumpistas. Back to the exciting subject of science and the evolutionary model in that. And where are we at 7:38? Oh, I need to give a thanks to my patrons here. We're slightly past the hour, half hour. And our everybody who has helped out at the Patreon site makes a big difference. I can certainly use more people in this. Tell everybody that you know about it. If they can pump a buck down on a regular basis, all that adds up. Our colleagues Hendril and Eric and Speed of Sound and Surus, and our researchers Travis Adams and Convert Me and Eat Meal and James Fitzwater and Ralph McFadden and Pelagia and Benjamin Simpson and Ugly German Truths. Our assistant researchers Mike Apple, Ian Chen, Duranku and Todes Real. Our friends Daniel and Steve Bowman and Marigail Beddoes and Insects Are Cool and Devin Reeves and Morton Nielsen and Buffaluffagus and Bo Rasmussen and Staggles and Alex Stone and Paul Williams and legacy patrons. You were able to help when you could. And I thank you also, Jen and Jody and John and Keith and Andrew and Dyer and Yui and Mona and Brad and Daniel and Nana and Sun Sky Stone and Everett and Sewer and Zeshi. Every one of you makes a difference on this. I'm a social security retiree who's bumping into the zone where will I reach the stage where I'll have to, the state won't pick up my Medicare that I don't use, but have anyway. I'm fortunately very healthy, knock wood, that I don't have to worry about any of that, but it's a tricky thing to do. I don't have the benefit of Kent Hovind or Ken Ham or Steve Meyer's megabuck support base. That makes life a hell of a lot easier to flit around with and to where they can go and travel and do the things they want to do with a resource base. I'm still clunking along at Social Security plus book royalties that trickles in. Speaking of which, no book sales this month. No book sales so far this January for 2020. There's books out there if you haven't bought Slam Dunk or if you like fiction, Paralogs of Phileas Fogg. Grab a hold of that, tell your friends about it, get it for presents, and everybody who has read the book and that, tell people about it, persuade them that it's a thing that is a resource that can be used. If it isn't being used, it won't have a difference. So there's my little soapbox here for the moment. Someone asked Jackson, growing a beard or just growing lazy?
Actually, I'm shaving the sides, so it is. And plus, I'm trimming it. I'm actually keeping it trim, so it's not
Van Dyke.
Yeah, it's not becoming unruly. Plus, up here it kind of gets in the lips, and so I got to shave that up.
Yeah, I had a mustache briefly after the Mount St. Helens eruption because I was off work for like weeks before the city started back up again. And so then I put a mustache on, but I didn't let it go too much because I couldn't stand the little things and crumbs underneath the thing. And I stuck it out for a while and then got rid of it. For beard, no, my beard, if I let it grow, it would be the scraggliest, most pathetic thing on earth. And that's on top of what I already look like anyway. So it's a waste of time.
Well, I really don't like my face completely clean shaven. Plus it's nice and warm under here, about a little pocket of warm air.
Not that you have to deal with tremendous cold there in Louisiana.
Oh my goodness, it was cold today. Jeez,
what was it there?
It was in the 30s.
Well, actually, that is pretty nippy. Yeah, actually, but you realize that we're the same temperature that you are at the moment?
Let's see. Currently, it is 43.
We're supposed to be into the 40s next week. So it's gradually, hopefully going to be melting off the snow. I was worried that I was going to have to do more snow shoveling in that. I got a long driveway. But a couple days ago, I was looking at the advanced weather forecasts and they were saying, yeah, temperatures are going into the 30s and into the 40s. And I'm going, I am not going to worry about the shoveling because the melt will take care of that. Anyway. KCA Randy, early 80s, a big stash art? No, it was a little itty bitty little thing like that. No. That was as far as it went. I've never had terribly long hair, so my current haircut is pretty much what you see until I can afford to get a haircut, and I'll have it trimmed back a little bit. They can't actually trim it back too much because I got kind of curly hair on the sides, and it'll go sprawling, and it'll look like Bertrand Russell or something in a hurricane, and we kind of want to avoid that as well.
Bertrand Russell. Jesus. Oh.
Anyway, So,
I forgot to ask whoever asked the question. Do they like it though?
Oh, yes. Tell me, do you like the look? Yeah.
Should I keep it or should it all go? Bear in mind that whether it stays is not dependent on your answer.
Yeah. TD Lane says, yeah, it could contact the university in Riverside and recommend Evolution Slam Dunk for its library, your local public library to boot on that. You know, the worst they can say is no. Let them know about it. Contact anyone that you know in universities and science departments, is particularly if the universities or schools already have an area where they do discuss creation evolution issues now and then, or do a Darwin Day thing, that tell them that here's a resource.
That's coming up.
Yeah, which is coming up in February. That it's a resource they will literally not find anywhere else, that it pulls them up to speed on the killer reptile mammal transition. That's why I wrote the damn book. If it was a situation where, boy, there's a dime a dozen glut of information pulling all of this stuff together, you could just go and find somebody else's book that did it. No, I deliberately wrote a targeted material that has been only peripherally discussed. It's alluded to casually in Jerry Coyne and some Richard Dawkins, but if you want to dive into the details of the reptile mammal transition, you're diving into big, heavy tomes that are probably not going to be in most university or college libraries. There's a mass of technical literature covering such a wide area. Plus, I pulled together all of the stupid that the creationists and intelligent designers had offered over the years, the very few, only about 20 people who actually dived into the reptile mammal transition. So it's the slam dunk that if anybody tries to tell you there's no evidence for macroevolution, you got the reptile mammal transition. You can explain it because of our jaw transition. You've got the physical science evidence, and you literally will know every possible counter argument that they could bring forward because you will have read me discuss every single one of them. So you'll know what Michael Denton said about it. You'll know what Dwayne Gish said about it. You'll know what Woodmarapp and the stuff that's online versus the material that's in print. You will be on top of Olympus looking down, just waiting to bring up probenignathids. and they're too juicy of a thing to go. They're not as sexy as dinosaurs. I'm a big dinosaur geek, so I have nothing to apologize for on the dinosaur front. But the sheer spectacle of the reptile mammal transition as a macroevolutionary sequence, that it has no holes in it that are like some of the circumstance with the early development and spread of dinosaurs, or the development
birds
of taxa from the and the birds in particular. It's better now than it used to be, and it's very impressive. And there's an awful lot of genetic and biological data. But one of the neat things about the reptile mammal transition, unlike bird evolution, is in some respects, birds are too drab. They're just feathered theropods that fly. So the gradations don't involve new anatomy. They don't involve any radical shifts of things. They're heightening the airflow of their hollow bones and their thermoregulatory systems that had a long range of background to it. So they're a beautiful example from that end. But with us, we've got our damn jaw. That mammals uniquely have a different jaw structure than all other vertebrates on the planet. We and we alone have a dentary squamosal jaw hinge. Single dentary bone attached to a particular skull bone, the squamosal. No other vertebrate does that. Every other vertebrate has the articular quadrate. They've got the dentary bone and then these other bones, and it's articular going to the quadrate bone, not the squamosal bone. How the hell did that happen? How can you get from one to the other? Guess what? We have the exact transitional sequence down to the predicted fossils and their muscle attachments. If you believe in design, you got to believe the designer really loved Robert Broom, the paleontologist, to deliberately design transitional forms at exactly the right time and space that specifically embody a unique form of life that doesn't exist now, but was predicted on evolutionary grounds. I don't find that very plausible. And no other macroevolutionary transition has that smoking gun like those bloody probenignathids. They look like little fuzzy mice, but they're not mice.
They're not in the rodent kind. That's for dang sure.
No. And you can literally explain it to people, because anybody that's seen a Halloween skull can do this, because you got that big dentary bone and the zygomatic arch in here. That's the old secondary, the skull opening, the single diapsid, synapsid skull opening. And then the fact that we still have the articular quadrate connection, it's in our ears. We hear with them. So it's not only do we have a unique jaw with a unique transitional form, but it's been co-opted for a completely another unique feature of mammals, the fact that we have a more complex middle ear that co-ops these things, and we have the transitional fossils for them down to the Meckel's cartilage and all that kind of stuff. Well, who could ask for a better transition than that? And the fact that you'll know, having read my book, plug, 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 that you will be aware of all of that technical information and a whole bunch else about feather evolution and bone morphological protein and sonic hedgehog and all the other funky little things that pop up in there that paleontologist Christine Janis, which we're going to put a blurb on the back end of the new book that will allude to this, saying, Donald is the author of Evolution Slam Dunk, which Christine Janis said is a incredible tour de force. And she did. You read her review on Amazon. So I'm very proud of the book. It's not as widely known as I would like. My royalty needs are such that naturally I want everyone on the planet to have a copy of it, but we'll settle for just more than currently have it. So there we go on that. Have been any questioning on bit here? Oh, TD Land, I loved how Tertius on Twitter was arguing that the reptile mammal transition or synapsid mammal transition wasn't a slam dunk because of the fuzziness regarding the endothermic transition. I constantly throw Kemp's 2006 technical paper at them. It's open access. You can find it online, so you can do the same trick, where he went through and laid out the dynamics of endothermy. And the fact is that raising the thermostat is something that occurs in a wide variety of organisms, that you even find them in fish. Tuna are functionally endothermic, for example. And in the case,
some sharks too, aren't they?
Yeah, there's some. Yeah, there's an enormous variety. In fact, all the viviparity, live birth is another element in there. And you start looking at the biological roots of the placenta and the components that go into that. There's a huge technical literature on all of this stuff, and not everybody is going to be able to dive into all the little fiddly bits on this. But everybody can pick a thing they really love and dive into the fiddly bits as best they can and gradually learn more and more of the technical terminology. What I want to foment is a group of people that know enough about this and are savvy with the YouTube. I can do it, gang. Anybody can. And be in a position that when anti-evolutionists are representing those views, TD Lane, I'm assuming that you're able to draw upon Slam Dunk for an understanding of the issue that you wouldn't in dealing with Tertius, that had you not been familiar with that information. And the more you get, the more confident you are. You don't have to go, oh, can I think of a good a macroevolution thing? I only discuss bacterial resistance to bactericides? Is that the best I can do? Oh yeah, you can do way better than that. And so I'm not at all shy about bringing up macroevolution. I just am itching to run into somebody that wants to discuss the Cambrian explosion and see whether or not they know nearly as much about it as they think.
I actually had some, well, I didn't get them, or they didn't want to come talk on my channel, but I was having a back and forth with a guy who knows absolutely nothing about it. He's an intelligent designer. He was, because I commented on the Fazal Rana paper, or a blog posting, because Rana claimed the Cambrian explosion was 2 to 3 million years old, which even by the very outdated Bowring paper is millions of years too short. It's now understood the Cambrian explosion, in the strict sense, occurred over about 25 million year range.
Yeah, and you really can't make sense of it unless you're looking at the windup from the early boundary in that early Manichaean phase, and then into the Timoshan small shelly fauna is looking. I discussed this in the 3 macroevolutionary episodes that you can download from my website. It's freebie. Make use of that. There's pictures too. Since I'm not charging for anything, we can get away with some of that stuff. but it has all the earmarks of an extinction pulse. That what you get with a mass extinction is you have a repertoire of organisms that most of which get cleaned out. A small group are remaining that occupy their niches, and they kind of go hog wild, as the therapsids did after the Permian mass extinction. They got the place pretty much to themselves. And then you get things that gradually you start seeing competitors coming up, and their hegemony starts pulling away, and you get a new group, and then eventually you settle into the thing that becomes the more standard model that dominates the period. And so you get these little pulses of things. They never are quick. They sometimes involve some of the refilling of that systematic bathtub can take 20 million years before some niches get refilled. And you'd think a designer can just go zot.
What's interesting about the Cambrian radiation is that in its entirety, it's actually multiple radiations and multiple events kind of happening in stepwise fashion. At the very end of the Ediacaran, you have the Nama assemblage, which is preceded by an extinction event. So basically, it seems like maybe a lot of the Ediacaran forms were wiped out by this extinction. And then you have the small shellies, who are just very beginning to start branching out. And then you cross over into the Cambrian in the first stage, the Fortunian or the Namakit, whatever it is. And you have kind of this proliferation of small shelly things and trace fossils. And then you find the first larger shelled critters, things like hyoliths. So you have the stem lineage radiation.
Yeah.
And then you have the extinction, the Sphinx extinction, which clears the deck for the crown lineages. So it's really step by step by step by step.
And there's a hidden ecosystem involved with those small shelly fauna and Claudina going back into the Precambrian, of the fact, and two, the trace fossils that indicate there are a whole bunch of little organisms, predators, and things disturbing the soil or the turf down there underwater, burrowing organisms that are becoming more and more intricate and complex, that are functionally invisible because they're not showing up. There are no Lagerstätten class deposits to preserve them. And by the time we get some big fancy Lagerstätten deposits that are all equatorial, if you rearrange the continents and stuff around there, you've got this kind of bowl-shaped land masses that extend up into the tropical zones and beyond. All of the three main Lagerstätten, Chengjiang in China and Burgess Shale in Canada, and Sirius Passet, and there's a few other ones.
Sirius Passet in Greenland.
They're all in Greenland. They're all equatorial in what used to be equator. All of those land masses are in the northern hemisphere now. There's been a lot of landmass moving around. But the thing is, we don't know a lot about what's going on in the rest of the planet, and it's all in the oceans. So what's going up on the land is virtually irrelevant, because there's no land life up there except maybe bacteria. So there's no insects, there's no plant life, there's no vertebrates or anything like that. There aren't even any vertebrates left. And so when you finally see the very earliest stages of the chordates that show up in these Lagerstätten, their ancestors must have been earlier, but the problem is, what are they going to look like? Well, the ones we see, are like little wiggly things. They're like an inch long. that the ancestor forms of these things 10, 5, 20 billion years earlier would be so small, and they're functionally invisible even by Lagerstätten standards. So there's an ecosystem world out there that we can just see the hints of, but it still doesn't fit anybody's model that's offered from an anti-evolution perspective. They don't offer an ecosystem world of what's going on. Theoretically, I guess, there would be the giant floating forest somewhere going on, maybe in Kurt Wise's model, and the land masses were somewhere. And where exactly was Eden and Noah and the bunch running around doing their little things at the same time as somewhere Dimetrodons and plesiosaurs and anomalocarids? All of this is happening at the same time. What's wrong with this picture?
yeah, and all the reefs and everything. Oh well.
Yeah, TD Lane's bringing up penis worms.
Actually, that's right. The trace fossil that defines the Cambrian layer, Traptichnus pedum, is a preapulid. It's a penis
Yeah.
worm, but there's no body fossil for it. But the burrows it makes
But the burrows are characteristic. That's another
diagnostic
one
of preapulids.
where it's inferred that there's something that's distinctively the shape of something made by something. Do you have any direct fossils of it? It's amazing that one of the little mantras that you want to disabuse people on is anybody who says all the animal phyla were present during the Cambrian had better be an evolutionist. Because if you aren't an evolutionist, you have no call to say that, because we cannot trace most of the animal phyla that far without inference. Most of what's done as to figuring out when phyla existed, like chinorynchs, would be based upon phylogeny, and that's genetics, and that's not based on fossils because they're tiny. You try to find a fossil for a chinorynch.
There are actually 2019, just this past year, a new Lagerstatt was discovered in China, which is contemporary with the Changjing. It's called
Ooh, did they find some chinorynchs?
Changjing. And they did. Yes, they did. They, in fact, found 3 species of crown chinorynchs in 2015.
I'll make sure that we've got that in the thing for the. I'll check on to see.
Just reading about it the other day.
Well, we'll be adjusting our phyla chart.
What's interesting about it is there was a stem chinorynch discovered back in 2015, Eochinorhynchus, I think in China.
TD Lane's doing really bad puns over there. Penis worms
really
are
neat
kind of dicks.
Kind of the are sister to each other, and so do it. What'd you say, RJ?
Oh, that TD Lane's doing some really bad puns in here. Penis worms are kind of dicks.
Yeah. Chinorynchs and preapulids are sister to each other, and so when you start getting down and you're looking at the stem chinorynchs and stem preapulids, they're showing a lot of similarities. Well, in 2016, there's actually a study done which showed the irreversible proboscis, the little mouth part that is spiny and extends, which chinorynchs and preapulids have, is actually a primitive character in Ozoans. It turned up also in Sycophorans and stem arthropods. So it was lost repeatedly in these lineages as time went on.
Yeah, and of course, all of that is something which they can look at to a certain extent, because you still have preapulids available to do the genetics on. All the other ones are a little bit funky. Well, we're past 8 o'clock in here, and so we should probably pull the plug on things. I'll have you stay online briefly so that we can go over that cute little chinorynch issue to make sure. We may already have it in the references for that phylum chart, but I want to make sure, if so, that we've got it the correct mark on that. So see you all next week. Don't accept any wooden penguins. Pick up my books. Tell everybody about those sorts of things. Help out Patreon or GoFundMe if you can. And keep plugging away at it. I know I am.